Hello and welcome to this video in which I'm going to be showing you how you can do ES6 object destructuring assignment in JavaScript. Now it sounds quite complex, but it's really just taking data from an object and storing that in variables like you see here. The primary use case for this would probably be you've made an API request, you've passed the response, and then you've got the data object, and you may get an object that looks a little bit like this, and then you want to extract that data into variables so it's easier to work with. So without knowing ES6 object destructuring, you probably opt for a solution that looks a little bit like this. So we're using dot notation to access each of the properties for which we're interested in. We're interested in the value, and then we can store this in a variable, and we do that for as many properties as we're interested in. So we end up here with 6 variables that store each of the property values. In fact, that's all of the properties contained in the object. So let's just log that to the console just to make sure it works. So we have full name, job, address, high school, college, and postgrad. So let's just head over to the browser just to check everything is fine. Okay, so we've got all of the data from the object displayed here in the console log. Now, what ES6 object destructuring allows you to do is to do this in one line of code. So I'm going to just comment this out now, and I'm going to take this console log, and I'm going to place it down here, and then I'm going to do the object destructuring with ES6 up here. So the way that we start is it looks like we're about to declare a regular variable, and then instead of the variable name, we open curly brackets and we name each of the properties we want to store in a variable here. So we have full name, job, address. So if there's nesting, which our object here does have, the way you deal with this is you name the key in which they're nested, in which case this is education, and then we open curly brackets again, and we do it as we were before because we're now basically working within at this steeper level. So high school, college, postgrad. And then finally, to complete this, we need to feed in the object, and we do that on the right-hand side. So we place my object here. Okay, so that's one line of code, and that's going to do exactly the same as above. So hopefully when we log this to the console now, we're going to see that there's no change. Okay, so we're getting exactly the same result through to the console now. So that is basic ES6 object destructuring, but there's more that we can do in this process that can be very useful in practice. So I'm going to show you 3 of these. The first one is change the variable names. So what if we want variable names that are different from the property key? So instead of full name, we might want just name. So the way that we would do that is I'm just going to copy our object down here in variable names, and I'll copy this. I'll comment that out. Okay, the way that we do that is after we name the property we're interested in, for example, full name, it's colon, and then whatever we want to call this variable. It just needs to be a valid variable name, that's all. And job, let's change that to occupation. Okay, so now no variable called full name or job will exist, but what will exist is our 2 variables called name and occupation that contain the values of the properties full name and job within that object. Okay, so logging that to the console, hopefully we see here Peter Parker and Spider-Man for occupation. Okay, so that can be really useful. What can also be really useful is setting a default value for some of the variables. So I'm just going to take this, just copy this example here, and we can set, so let's try setting a default value for one of the variables. So let's try it with the name. Now, the way we do this is specify a value um, after the name variable here. So, for example, we may want this to be anonymous. Now, if we run this, this is going to give us exactly the same result as before because it does find a property for Peter Parker. And so it doesn't use our default variable, the default value for the variable. Now, if I go back up to our object and change Peter Parker to undefined, now I run it, now you'll see that this is going to be anonymous. So this can be really useful because when you're making an API call, sometimes what you get back isn't all that predictable. Okay, finally, how can we create a new object without the destructured properties? So this is a special feature of ES6 that would be a complete nightmare to do without it if we were just using the dot notation method. So what I'm going to do here is really simplify this example. I'm going to just break it down here. So we've got we're just going to take full name and one of the nested properties. Okay, so let's go for education is the key, and then within that we have high school. So before we go any further, let's just log those to the console and check that they are there. Okay, great, Peter Parker and true. Now, the way that we go about creating this new object with the remaining properties that we haven't extracted is we use the spread operator followed by the name of the variable we want to create. So by convention, this is usually rest, but you could call it whatever you want and it would still work. So let's log that to the console now and see if that worked. So there's actually going to be a problem here if you can spot it. So we don't have any of the nestings. So this is a limitation of this method. If you try and extract one of the nested properties, it will return none of the nested properties in the returned object. If we were to just take full name from the first level and then rest, this would actually work perfectly okay. So we'll see. Actually, let me just check high school. It's because I'm logging high school and I didn't destructure that this time. So let's head back. So now we can see it's returned the rest variable. Okay, it's stored this object. It's got the nesting in it. Okay, so how do we solve this problem? So the way that we can do this is to make a change to my object at the end there in a second instance. So we can say my object education. Okay, I'm going to delete these console logs for now. And here we want high school. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're taking full name from the primary level, and then from this nested level, we're taking high school within education. Okay, so we can use the spread operator again. So let's call this rest nested. And what I'm going to do in there is I'm going to spread in, okay, these need distinct names for the variables here. I'm going to spread in rest1. Okay, so this is going to create, what this is doing is it's spreading all those properties into a new object, into this object literal. And then what I'm going to do is you might think rest2, but that wouldn't work because we're going to end up with all of the education on the first level as well. What we need to do is we need to specify education, and then inside there we spread then rest2, and this should produce rest2, and this should produce the result we're looking for. We should have all the remaining properties in rest nested, except for full name on the first level and high school in that nested level we have. So let's test this now. Hopefully this is going to work first time. Okay, great. So we don't have full name, but we do have address and job. So just compare that to our original full name, address and job. Yeah, those are the two on the primary level. And then we should have college and postgrad at the nested level. And we have here college and postgrad and high school is missing. So that's how we do object destructuring. I hope you found this video useful. In the next video I make, I'm going to be covering array destructuring. So look out for that. It's very similar to object destructuring, but there are some differences, which means we need to adjust the method for an object of type array.